Thank you so much. Well, this dialogue has been co-organized by the co-chairs of the Consortium of Scientific Partners on Biodiversity, which is a network of technical and scientific agencies that contribute to the implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity and its associated protocols. Citizen science, also referred as crowdsourcing, participatory, or community science, provides an opportunity to engage society in collecting, analyzing, and interpreting biodiversity data, identify research questions, co-create, and develop solutions. But it's also an opportunity for society and scientists to influence policy and decision-making at a range of different scales. In this virtual session of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity, representatives from leading scientific agencies, natural history museums, and other experts will exchange experiences on citizen science and will reflect on its contributions in the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The outcome of this event will be reported at the next conference of the parties of the CBD. Following our agenda for today's session, I am pleased to give the floor to Ms. Giselle Didier, Deputy Director of Research at the Alexander von Humboldt Institute in Colombia, co-chair of the CSP. Ms. Didier's areas of interest and expertise include the comprehensive management of biodiversity, human development, indigenous peoples and local communities, and project management, in which she has worked for more than 25 years. Giselle, you have the floor for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Juanita. I am very pleased to be here with you today. And on behalf of my co-chair, the Smithsonian Institute, I would like to give greetings to you all and welcome to this virtual session on the importance of participatory science in the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. I would like to thank the members of the CSP and other stakeholders for their interest in holding this event on participatory science, recognizing that their actions are essential to strengthen the science policy interface and supporting decision-making for the sustainable management of biodiversity and ecosystem services by connecting knowledge and decision-making from a perspective of synergies and different knowledge systems. The knowledge that citizens, indigenous peoples, and local communities have acquired due to their connection to their territories and daily contact with nature are contributions of great value for decision-making. For example, biodiversity inventories, protocols for conservation, species distribution maps, life plans for indigenous people and local communities benefit from this knowledge. Dialogue exercise between scientists and citizens contribute to strengthening citizen initiatives around biodiversity. For example, social and community conservation actions, urban ecology groups, groups and networks of bird watching or recording the sounds of nature, and those who are passionate about nature photography can be highly benefit from this joint work. But also, participatory science is of great importance and relevance for the achievements of the objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as other international agreements that have to do with biodiversity and climate action, as well as for the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It is worth highlighting the role of participatory science, the role that participatory science can play in the current global processes. The recently concluded Stockholm Plus 50 meeting stressed the need to advance in actions based on equity and inclusion with a view to moving effectively towards the sustainable development. The global biodiversity framework that is being negotiated in the Convention of Biological Diversity is based on transformational changes as one of the guiding principles for its definition and future implementation. Participatory science is set up through the experiences and knowledge of citizens, indigenous peoples, and local communities, supported by science and research, on issues on nature-based solutions, nature benefits for people, community-based adaptation, green infrastructure and biodiversities, among other relevant fields of action that can leverage transformational changes. We would like to invite you all to continue strengthening participatory science exercise, which comprehensively address gender consideration, youth and children, indigenous peoples, and local communities, as well as other social stakeholders who want to incorporate their voices and efforts in the biodiversity decision-making processes and in the shared desire to consolidate a society that advances towards sustainable development in harmony with nature. Thank you very much to everybody, and I hope you enjoy this webinar.
Thank you very much, Giselle. Now I would like to introduce you Dr. Alison Kaywood, Director of Public Engagement at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, where she oversees the citizen science, education, and professional training programs. Additionally, Alison has served as the chair of the 2021 and 2022 Citizen Science Association annual meetings. Dr. Kaywood, you have the floor for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone from Annapolis, Maryland. Thanks to the CSP members and the program organizers for bringing us all together to discuss these really important issues this morning. As Giselle was saying, participatory science has incredible value not to communities and to researchers. It can increase the spatial and temporal coverage of the way that we're able to collect data. It can increase the likelihood of capturing rare events, and it can provide a way for researchers and communities to engage in discussions related to priorities, methods, and conservation solutions. As some examples, at just one institution, the Smithsonian, where I'm based, volunteers are involved in work to understand how wetlands are responding to climate change, to track invasive species that travel on boat hulls and marine debris, to monitor the diversity of mammals in urban and suburban spaces around the world, understanding that the ways that pollinators are behaving in urban community spaces, developing methods for germinating and propagating native orchids, and transcribing records from natural history collections so that they can be digitized and used by researchers around the world. At the recent Sea Science 2022 conference, researchers, community organizers, teachers, resource managers, and volunteers engaged in rich discussions about the necessity of engaging many voices, perspectives, and skill sets to address pressing environmental issues. I'm very glad to see this conversation and continuing here today. So thank you all for having me, and I'm very excited to listen and learn from you all today.
Thank you very much, Alison, for your inspiring words. Now I would like to introduce Mr. Claudio Chiarola, Program Management Officer of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity and responsible for technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer. He also leads the implementation of the BioBridge initiative. Claudio, you have the floor to share your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Juanita. A good day to all of you. And thank you also, Giselle and Alison, for the great introductory words that you shared with us. And so I would like, first of all, to thank the Consortium of Scientific Partners on Biodiversity, and in particular our co-chairs, the Alexander von Humboldt Institute and the Smithsonian Institute, for really leading the organization of this very special session of the 5th Science Policy Forum on Biodiversity. I'm very honored to represent the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity at this flagship event on citizen science at this very critical juncture. As you may recall, in light of the postponement of the 15th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity due to the pandemic, the first leg of the forum started virtually in April 2021, jointly with the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science, which was led by the Institute for Future Initiative of the University of Tokyo. Many of you, together with more than 2,200 participants, contributed to those virtual sessions and shared your experiences and lessons learned and made recommendations for consideration by the subsidiary body on technical and technological advice and the subsidiary body on implementation of the convention during the session that took place shortly thereafter. Today, this important webinar continues that work, builds on that work, which will culminate with a forum event that will be held in person at the Conference of the Party later this year. As you all know, the 15th Conference of the Parties to the Convention will adopt an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework that will provide a decisive direction to our collective roadmap for action. However, its implementation will require mobilization of partnerships, redirecting and repurposing resources across all sectors, capacity development, and most importantly, empowering the necessary transitions and sectors of society to enable real on-the-ground change. We envisage this new framework to be a framework for all, engaging the whole of society and the whole of government in its development and implementation. The contributions of academia and of scientific and research institutions, as well as the direct engagement of citizens and indigenous peoples and local communities through participatory science will be crucial to ensure that ambition translates into concrete and measurable actions on the ground. The solutions to our problem, we all know, can be found in nature, and science and other forms of knowledge, including traditional and indigenous knowledge, allow us to discover and borrow nature's blueprints, strategies, and recipes that can help to solve such critical problems that you're facing, while also generating and providing benefits more equitably across society. We recognize that participatory science, coupled with the use of appropriate technology, not only help to foster collaborative research and empower society as a whole, but is also instrumental for generating new knowledge through a bottom-up approach, for identifying locally adapted solutions and innovation that can better respond to local needs, and to monitor biodiversity in a capillary and effective manner as never before. Participatory science and harnessing nature-positive technologies and innovation will indeed play a very pivotal role in supporting sustainable development efforts and enabling societies to respond to the planetary crisis currently facing humanity, particularly climate change and, of course, biodiversity loss. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework requires strong means of implementation to facilitate real and meaningful change on the ground, which can happen only in tandem with deeper societal transformations that can lead our development trajectories, which shall be driven by the collective action of our citizens and cannot happen without such action. I invite you all to join hands and work together to address these multiple interrelated challenges that life on Earth is facing today, and to drive the overall desired transformative change. And thank you so much again for contributing to this very, very important contribution to the Science Forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudio, and thanks to the CBD Secretariat for all the support in the organization of this virtual session. Thank you also to our co-chairs, the Institute, Alexander von Humboldt and Smithsonian. And now we will hear a nice presentation on citizen science by Ms. Carolina Soto. She's a researcher at the Alexander von Humboldt Institute in Colombia, and for the last 4 years, she has been leading the Participatory Science and Traditional Knowledge Research Group. At her work, she proposes new approaches to engaging people in conservation through meaningful participation based on ethics, justice, and equity. You are encouraged to use the chat to post questions or comments. Questions that are not able to be answered by our expert during this session will be answered later. Carolina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Juanita, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here and to see many, many people interested in participatory science, citizen science. So first of all, I would like you to ask a question. I have a question for you, and it's, what is participatory science for you? What is citizen science for you? So the chat is open, and I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. Please write your comments on the chat. Cindy is going to be checking your comments, so don't be shy. I want to see you typing there. What is citizen science for you? Which words come to your mind? I see Juanita is pretty active there. Anyone else, please send your comments. Chat is open to everybody. Just 10 seconds. Nice. I see some people writing, pretty cool. 5 seconds. Go ahead, please. Uh, 3 seconds to go. I see you typing. One second to go. Nice. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our vision at the Humboldt Institute. So basically we have a group, it's called the Participatory Science Research Group. For us, citizen science, participatory science is a different kind of research. We are seeking to engage different kind of audiences. As Claudio mentioned before, it's not only about scientific knowledge, it's also about traditional knowledge. So basically, we are basing all our approaches in the exchange and dialogue of knowledge. For us, collaborative work is very important, and I saw many of you typing collaboration. That's the key of citizen science. And then we have strong capacity building. Why? Because we have to identify in every single project the importance of transfer of capacities. Citizen science is innovation. It's about having novel approaches for reaching different kinds of audiences and public. And then I here have a word that is very, very important, is inclusion. We have to be very inclusive in the way we think citizen science, participatory science. We have to recognize and acknowledge the importance of diversity. And we are doing all of this, and we are betting on citizen science because we think it's very important for decision making. We want to support decision making at different scales. This is very important because we have our team, and our team represents inclusion and diversity. And I wanted to highlight the citizen science, participatory science team at the Humboldt Institute, because we acknowledge the importance of different points of view. Then we have lawyers, then we have sociologists, biologists, ecologists, geographers. And that is why we want to bring different things to the table. We need different approaches. We need to think beyond the traditional ways of doing research. Here at the Humboldt Institute, we started working like 4.5 years ago. And through the years, we have worked with almost 5,000 people in different regions around the country. Then you can see different kind of projects. Then we have inventories, but also we have monitoring. Then we have also bioblitzes. And for every single project, we have a different approach because we know that citizen science is not a recipe. Yes, it has key elements, but it's not a recipe, which is very important to have in mind. Then you can see in the map, but we move around the country. And for us, it's very, very important to acknowledge the social context of every single project. What is citizen science or participatory science without people? Then we work with different persons and communities around the country. We work with peasants, with rural communities. We work in urban environment with urban citizens. We have a really strong connection with universities and schools. We are working also with indigenous peoples and other ethnic groups, and also we are working with ex-combatants. Now let's talk a little bit about tools. We use some digital tools I think you're pretty familiar with. We are using iNaturalist. Here in Colombia, we have our own node. It's called Naturalista Colombia. We are also using eBird, but we are also pretty aware of the context that we have in our country. So we are going for the traditional tools also, because we know and we are pretty aware that not everyone in Colombia has access to technology. So if we are thinking in processes that are supporting justice and equity, we have to be very aware which kind of methodology we are using and which kind of tools are we implementing. Let's go for the examples. So as I mentioned before, we work in urban areas and rural areas. Then we have this project, it's called Biodiversity. It's an initiative from the national government, and now we have a project with the Ministry of Environment. We are doing some bioblitzes around the country in 8 cities. What's the main objective? We want to collect data, but we also want to reconnect and connect people with nature. For us, it's an opportunity for collecting data on cities, but also it's a way of people connecting with the cities through biodiversity. We also have participatory monitorings. And for us, this is a really important project because it was a way of questioning ourselves. What's the really like importance of, or what is the core of monitoring and participatory monitoring? Then we decided to bet on it. And at the end, we are including all the local communities since point number 1, which means that all the communities are proposing their own research questions. And for us, that is changing the paradigm because we are trying to balance relationships and we are trying to be more fair and more just and adjust the asymmetries of power. Then we are creating together, we are taking care of biodiversity. We are really interested in monitoring, but also we are interested in how this monitoring is going to help local communities. Another example, we have biological expeditions, and that one, it was called Alas Cantos y Colores. It was an ornithological expedition. We were working in different places around the country with the National University, and then we were thinking, we are in the country of birds, then we need to support everything related with birds, but working with communities. And over the year, we were working with over 500 people and everyone was engaged in birds conservation. And then again, it was a dialogue between traditional knowledge, biological knowledge, and finding the common points for conserving biodiversity. And last but not least is the Sea Flower Plus 2021 is really close to my heart. We were working in the islands of San Andres, Providencia, and Santa Catalina. Those islands were very affected by Iota hurricane. When we arrived there, we knew that we have to conduct a biological expedition to see what happened after the hurricane, because biodiversity was compromised, livelihoods were very compromised, and all the homes were destroyed. Then we thought, yes, we have the biological component, but also we need a participatory approach. We were working with the local researchers, the Raizales communities. We were building together, we were learning together, and we also decided that we needed to go one step ahead. So we created a co-created guide of species that show us the knowledge of the communities, the biological knowledge, and we were working together. So it was extreme citizen science because we were thinking about the traditional business as usual, and we were proposing different kind of approaches. I just want to finish my talk saying that I think citizen science is an opportunity for transformational change. I know it has opportunities. I know it has challenges, but then I think it's a great scenario for building together. And for us, people in the South, I think it's great because we are thinking out of the box in a different kind of model of research, where we are thinking about a research that is relevant, that is inclusive, and it's fair. So my thanks a lot. My 10 minutes are over. And if you have questions, we have like 5 minutes to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Caro. And I wasn't wrong when I said that we will have a nice presentation. What a beautiful presentation you just made. Thank you for all those pictures that you share with us. And we encourage everybody to use the chat, as you mentioned, for questions or comments. We have 5 minutes to open that section in our webinar. So please go ahead.
So we have Araceli. It's a question in Spanish. How you invite people to participate? Participar cuando la pregunta de investigación aún surgirá del grupo. So Araceli, if you want to add more to your question, but I think you are asking about the monitoring, right?
Yeah, thank you, Caro. I'm asking about when you were saying that you involve the people since the beginning.
Yes.
That means that together rise the research question. And in my mind is that what happens when you invite people? There is no a specific topic, or you say together we are going to investigate because the question is not ready at the beginning. We are to construct together. Is in that sense?
Yes, Areli. So basically, we start from point 0 for us, that is discussing about all the needs of the places we are working at, the needs of the communities, their common interest. So we start in the process that we call exchange of knowledge. Then we start seeing common points and everything, and after that we start working in the research question. And then the role of the institute is like a companion through the process of research. Basically, is that what we do?
Thank you.
Caro, we have another question in the chat. Where does the data goes and how is it used to help the country to meet the CBD targets? So how is it really useful?
Yes, so basically all the information is going to the National Biodiversity System, and also it's going to our own tools. We have something called the Biotablero at the Humboldt Institute, and we are using all the information for decision making. Everything it's based on agreements with the communities. So for us, we are using the information for having more info about occurrences of some species, and for the people, they are using the information at the local level. And that's why it's super important to include all the communities where we are working with at the beginning. And that's why the question has to be really, really relevant for the people we are working with.
Thank you. And there's a question about sharing the presentations. Of course, we will share the presentations. And as we said, we are recording the session, so don't worry. The other question that I have here in the chat is how do you ensure data that is accurate?
So we are like supporting the communities through the process. So for example, in monitoring, it takes more than a year, and we are there to assure that the protocols are in place and everything. And what do you think is more important, data collection or connecting people with nature? I'm passionate about people. For me, it's connecting people with nature, because if we start with that, then you can go ahead and dream about the world and everything. But for me, it's like how we connect and reconnect with nature. We can hear you, Juanita.
Sorry. No, thank you, Caro, for that lovely presentation and for those questions. We will continue with our agenda. We will start with the section on experiences of citizen science from around the world. When we will hear different experiences of citizen science, which are inspiring examples of projects implemented by CSP members and other stakeholders. So let me introduce you to our moderator for this section, Ms. Myrna Inés Fernández Pradel from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, who be introducing the speakers of this section and leading this part of the agenda. I will ask Ms. Myrna for a very short introduction of yourself. And after the presentations, we will encourage everybody to use the chat for your questions and comments during this section. We will have the opportunity at the end also to give the floor to maximum 4 participants that have asked for the floor, raising your hand or indicating this in the chat to share their own experiences as well. And participants taking the floor will have then 2 minutes maximum to do their experience sharing. So we invite them to be brief. Ms. Myrna, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Juanita. And it is a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Myrna Fernandez. I am from Bolivia. I am an environmental engineer with a master's in tropical biology, and I am the policy co-coordinator of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. GYBN is the participation mechanism for young people at the Convention on Biological Diversity, but we are also a network of young people in action for biodiversity. So we have more than 40 national chapters and regional chapters that are engaged in various activities, and citizen science is one of them. So for example, my chapter, the Bolivian chapter, has been engaged in the iNaturalist City Nature Challenge last month, and our city got the first place in 3 categories that are with the highest, well, it is the city with highest number of observations, highest number of species, and highest number of participation. So that's just an example of how young people with the right tools can do great advances in citizen science. So I am very happy to be moderating this panel. I'm very excited about our fellow panelists that have amazing initiatives, projects, and programs that are focusing on involving a lot of more people in citizen science. So with that said, I would like to introduce to our first speaker, who is Bill McShay. Bill McShay is a wildlife ecologist at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, whose work focuses on research, habitat mapping, and conservation planning for mammals and forests throughout Asia. Bill is also very engaged in training the next generation of conservation researchers in field data collection and remote sensing techniques. Please, Bill, you have the floor. And again, I encourage the audience to use the questions and answers window for questions, and to signal if you would like to speak.
Thank you, Myrna. As mentioned, I'm a wildlife ecologist for the Smithsonian, and I couldn't do most of my science without citizen scientists. They're an essential part of my job. I'm a landscape ecologist. It's relatively easy to get a remote sensing image of the landscape, of the trees, of the topography, but it's not possible to get an image of what mammals are there and what animals live across that landscape. I need on the ground work in order to link the mammal biodiversity, in my case, with the landscape features. And for that, I use citizen scientists. I also, most of my science revolves around camera traps. Camera traps are a remote sensing tool you can place out in the forest. They can work 24/7 to take a picture of animals that go by. And that makes itself relatively easy for citizen scientists to get involved, in that 90% of the work is done by those cameras, and it's standardized. If everyone's given the same camera model, then the camera models work the same across the landscape. And you organize the citizen scientists to place out the cameras, retrieve the cameras, upload the data, and identify the animals. That's their role in the science project. I've been doing this overseas in Asia a lot, but I'm going to talk today about mostly my US work. The first projects we did were along the Appalachian Trail. It's a long trail in the United States, eastern United States, that runs from north to south. And we took about a 500-mile section of that trail and placed camera traps along the entire trail. And I can't do that. I can't be in 100 places at the same time, but I can recruit volunteers to adopt different sections of the trail. And if I provide them with cameras, they move the cameras along that section of the trail and upload the data to me. And that allowed us to record mammals along that whole 500-mile section and look at correlates between the mammal communities and the human impacts along the trail. That was followed up by a project looking at protected areas in the mid-Atlantic of the United States. We identified 25 protected areas, again, recruited people that through the web that live around these protected areas. We worked on the permits with the protected areas on where people could put cameras. Then we allowed the volunteers to place the protected areas, then allowed the volunteers to come on the land, put out the camera, record the mammals, and upload that data. A variation on that was a project called Urban to Wild, where we recruited volunteers from Washington, D.C. out to the west to the mountains of West Virginia. And along that corridor, again, we worked on the permissions for where the cameras could be placed. Then through the web, recruited volunteers who put out the cameras, collected the data, and uploaded it to us. Lastly, in the last 3 years, we've been working on a project called Snapshot USA. Snapshot USA, we've recruited universities and colleges from all 50 states in the United States to all go out at the same time and collect data the same way with the camera traps and all upload that to a shared site so that we have a snapshot essentially of the distribution of mammals across the United States. What do all these projects have in common? They have several features in common. One is a shared protocol. Everyone in our projects on a specific project has to work off of the same protocol. We have a shared data receptacle. In our case, it's called eMammal, but they upload their data to that shared site. And we also have what we would call an expert review tool where the volunteer uploads the data, records the location, identifies the mammal in the photograph, and then we have an expert who is a professional who looks at those images and says, yes, that's a white-tailed deer. Yes, that's a raccoon. Yes, that's a bobcat. So we have that quality control on the volunteer work. Lastly, we believe strongly that data should be shared with the participants. So if you're uploading data to a project, you are able to see all the data on that project. And that makes it very powerful for the volunteers. They like to see not only the data they've collected, the images they've obtained, but what everyone else has found also. And they can communicate with each other on, I love that photograph of a bobcat. I love that mountain lion photograph. That kind of communication among the volunteers turns out to be very powerful for retaining volunteers in the program. Also, we need to have coordination along the way. Even though this is a citizen science project, there have to be professionals involved. Someone to organize, motivate, recruit, retain the citizen scientists themselves. It isn't a self-running program. It needs that professional who is mostly a people person and can organize those people and motivate them to collect the data in the right way. And lastly, we have the scientists who are using that data in a quantifiable way to produce results, to look at the big picture and allow the volunteers to see that their data is being used for a bigger cause. Put all those things together and that makes for a good citizen science project. We've done this also overseas, and in overseas, we're in Asia, we are recruiting at the community level. So we would either ask a village or a reserve to join the program, and then they would coordinate the volunteers. We would deal with the leaders in that village or the NGO in that village, and they would deal with the local volunteers directly. But the same principle holds. The data gets collected under a shared protocol, the data gets put into a shared site, and everyone who contributes data is allowed to look at that data and use that data. We do have some caveats for endangered species. We do not release the exact location of endangered species. So you would say this animal lives around this village, but not the exact location of where that animal was photographed. But beyond that, we allow the data to be shared in that I have things I want to do with the data, and we allow the participants to find out what they want to do with the data, to discuss among themselves what the data would be used in for their purposes and their knowledge gaining. And that works out well. We've had a lot of success and a lot of retention of volunteers. And that's we probably will continue with this, especially with the Snapshot USA as a model for trying to collect data off of a broad landscape without having it be government derived and government driven. It's more done by the local people, and it becomes much more receptive for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bill. I think what you shared are great tools, and that is what we need to have the volunteers collect the right data in the right way, as you said. I would like to invite our next speaker now, who is Lorraine Lecourtois. She is the head of the public programs for Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, Wakehurst and research lead for Nature Unlocked Wellbeing Research. She will be speaking to us about the integration of citizen science in Kew's public program and education programs. Lorraine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I want to talk about a program which encompasses a cluster of citizen science projects, and it's really I'm repeating quite a lot of what's already been said. Actually, the key to this cluster is that we have shared protocols across everything that we're doing, and that everything is feeding into one data repository, and that's what holds this cluster of programs, this cluster of projects together in this program. So this research is taking place at Wakehurst, which is our wild botanic garden in Sussex, about 50 miles or so away from Kew Gardens in London. And the reason that we're using Wakehurst for this research is it's a very biodiverse site. It's a 535-acre site. We have about 400,000 visitors a year and 18,000 members at Wakehurst. So we have a lot of public with whom we can interact and engage with on a regular basis. And so we're using that group of people to take part in these citizen science projects, and through that creating much deeper engagement with our visitors and much better relationships and conversations with our visitors on site at the Botanic Garden. So the research is called Nature Unlocked, and it has 4 pillars: climate adaptation and mitigation, invertebrates in the landscape, and nature connectedness. And I'm going to talk about 3 of those today. I'm going to start with pollination. So this, I'm sure everyone on this call is really doing pollination surveys with volunteers is a really easy way in to citizen science and participatory work. And we can use loads of broad groups of people to do this. So we have some groups of members and volunteers who come back on a regular basis and do regular surveys in regular places. We also do partnerships with local businesses and companies that send large amounts of their staff down, and we do a BioBlitz volunteering day. But by making sure we're all using the same protocols all of the time, we can make sure all of this data is fed back, again, using our own scientists to verify data, and it's all being collated in our data receptacle. So there's varying levels that we can do the research at by ensuring that the protocols are clean. The pollination research focuses very much on the different habitats that we have here at Wakehurst. So we have an extensive array of meadows, we have wetlands, we have woodlands, and through that, I'm just going to click to the next slide. We are also looking at our nature connectedness work. So we can then overlay people's connection to nature, and the volunteers that are participating in the pollination studies are at the same time participating in research as to how connected they are to nature and how connected they are in those different landscapes, and how their citizen science involvement has impacted on their connected to nature. So we're kind of doing several layers of research all at the same time over a long period of time in various sites across Wakehurst. The third strand that I just wanted to talk about was carbon. Again, camera traps have already been mentioned, and we've been working with drones, and there are what we call farm cluster groups across the UK, and we're working with farmers and farm cluster groups to train them and provide them with drones and camera traps and all that sort of thing, so that they can gather data on a much wider scale that can then be compared to the habitats and the carbon map that we have here for Wakehurst. And this is a project that's really in its infancy, but it will give us much broader data across a much wider landscape than we could possibly manage with the scientists that we have. So a really exciting and interesting way of us gathering data on that wide scale. And that is it from me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lorraine, for sharing the great work. Do you want to add anything? If not, thanks for.
Oh, I'm sorry, you saw me go. I just remembered what I forgot, which is that the farm cluster groups are actually designing the research questions themselves. So we've been working with them to ask them what they want to know about their landscapes and feeding that into the research. Sorry, I'll turn my camera off now so you won't see my facial expressions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for sharing, and I do understand there is a lot to share and you only have 5 minutes, which is a challenge, but thanks a lot for keeping up to that challenge. I would like to share, give the floor to our next speaker, but you are more than welcome to keep sharing your questions, and to our speakers, you can see the questions in the chat. Our next speaker is Ana Maria Benavides from the Botanic Garden in Medellin. Ana Maria Benavides is Head of Conservation at the Medellin Botanical Garden and Coordinator for the Aburrá Valley of City of Nature Challenge. So Ana Maria, you are welcome to speak.
Thank you, Mirna, and welcome everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I want to share my screen. I'm just going to try. And first, I want to present our city, the Aburrá Valley. We have in this city more than 4 million of people with a huge density. We are in a very compact city, but we have a lot of very urban areas around us. And we are in the Andean area, in the tropical forest. So we have a high biodiversity. In this, we also have forests, agricultural areas, and a pressure for transformation of the landscape. We know about the nature around us, but since the City Nature Challenge, we have been participating during the last 4 years, more or less, and for us had been an opportunity to learn. We have know that this is a learning process. We have a lot of biodiversity around us, but for us, like biologists and botanists, and many people that work with biodiversity, we know like maybe like 20% of the biodiversity that is around us. And also many of the organisms that are around Medellin, we don't have the record in museums or herbarium. So we understand that this is a long-term process, and our main goal during, maybe the next 10 years is to train citizens. And we are very focused in forest rangers, naturalists, children, and social leaders. We have 2 points or 2 standards that we want to achieve is how to record and how to identify our biodiversity. Very basic question, but are the foundation for our learning process. So we are to the City Nature Challenge. We have like workshops of preparation that are open to the public in our botanical garden. This year we returned to the workshop in face-to-face, but during the last 2 years we have been in virtual workshops and everything like more virtual. But this year we returned to face-to-face, and we have like a lot of volunteers, students, young biologists that bring the knowledge to many people that visit us and that have been engaged with the City Nature Challenge. Our like a lab, so we train in field. We did this workshop for in a room, but then we cover training in our botanical garden, and also we had been record many like short videos of our biodiversity in YouTube, the YouTube of the Medellin Botanical Garden. You can check this in internet. And a lot of numbers of this City Nature Challenge during this year is we were together with more than 400 cities around the world with a huge number of observation species and participants. So this is a huge mobilization around biodiversity. In our own city, we reach more than 10,000 observations, almost 2,000 species, and you can see 230 participants. During this that we had been participated, we have the opportunity to record more than 3,000 species. But this is more than the number. We are aware of many different species that we have been record. I just want to share some of them here in this chart. For example, I don't know if you can see my mouse. I'm not sure, yes. But we have here the first photograph of a new species, Boxillus and miguelensis. There are species that had been not described in this picture. There are orchids like here that have a new record for the city or for the region. So there are many stories that we can talk, but we feel that we are working for the future because more in these 3 years, we have more around 3,000 observations. But if you see the yellow part here are observations that need identifications. So there are more need of identification that actually species that are with a good grade of identification. So we feel here that we are record like a huge atlas for the future. And we hope that in the future we know more. We feel that every event we know more about the biodiversity around us, but we have the time and the process to learn around this and to build like the community that contributes every year to the City Nature Challenge. And I want to share this picture. Key pieces of our challenge, of City Nature Challenge, are the guardabosques, the forest rangers around the city in the peri-urban areas, and many social leaders that you can see here in these pictures. And recently we give acknowledgement for the participation. So that is what I want to share, just a peek of what we are doing during the last 3 years with the City Nature Challenge. And for us, the most important is that we are in a learning process.
Thanks a lot, Anna. And yes, for the ones of us who know the City Nature Challenge, we know it's an amazing initiative and has delivered a lot of crazy results, but it's also a very big logistic challenge. So thanks a lot for being able to keep up this challenge as well. We would like with this to invite our next speaker, but I still encourage you to keep using the chat for questions and answers. And I am thankful for our previous panelists who are being very active, responding to all the questions they are getting. So our next speaker is Namla Mbona. Namla Mbona is from the South African National Biodiversity Institute and works with citizen science groups, young and old, including schools and other interested communities on the management and monitoring of their aquatic ecosystems. She will talk to us about an innovative project to address water insecurity in South Africa. So Namla, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. As Mina mentioned, I work for the South African National Biodiversity Institution. So just a bit of a background around the South African National Biodiversity Institution. So SANBI has a mandate of to be our dedicated biodiversity institution that bridges science, knowledge, policy, and implementation. Okay. My slideshow seems not to work. Yes. So SANBI has 10 conservation gardens, which serves to be our windows to the biodiversity found in their unique regions within the country. SANBI works closely with a managed network, including biodiversity specialists, NGOs, provincial and local government agencies, academics, and inclusion citizen scientists. As part of SANBI's big mandate is to monitor and report regularly to our government on the status of the biodiversity, conservation status of all listed threatened or protected species and listed ecosystem, and the status of all listed invasive species, to mention a few. Citizen scientists contribute to the foundational biodiversity data work by collecting data, images, voucher materials, which are building blocks to our biodiversity knowledge. So for my talk today, I've chosen an example of a project that is called the Living Catchments Project, which is a collaborative project that is being implemented by SANBI in partnership with the Water Research Commission through funding of the Department of Science and Innovation. And the project aims to address some of the water scarcity issues that have been identified in the Water Research Development and Innovation Roadmap for South Africa. The project takes place in 4 unique catchments that are within the strategic water source areas of South Africa. These 4 unique catchments have been selected on their strategic importance to the economy, dependence of major cities on these water sources, and their contributions to supporting rural livelihoods. And some of the clusters of the activities in this cluster is capacity and tools, learning platforms, and convening space communities of practice. In these catchments, we've used a number of different tools, which I'll mention just as quickly go through all the catchments. It's Minisus, which is a tool for monitoring the river using microinvertebrates by taking a sample of water and identifying those microinvertebrates that were found and using those microinvertebrate scores on their sensitivities of and tolerance of pollution to identify an ecological state of that river. So we use Minisas, Clarity Cube, Velocity Plank, a spring assessment tool, and a wetland tool. And we also use iNaturalist. This is an example of a youth group that we went to the Tukela catchment, where we hosted a learning exchange that included our eco-champs from the Mzimvubu catchments and Varo-champs from the other catchments and our postgrad students within the project. And these are the photos of the groups doing Minises and also using the velocity plank. Again, also for the Mzimvubu catchment, we've hosted a couple of activities, including bioblitzes of an area that is a proposed protected area using iNaturalist, and also doing the other citizen science tools that I've mentioned. This is again an example of another youth in the rural area of Bizana in Mzimvubu. And we again here teach the youth on using these tools and mostly also collecting species list using iNaturalist. These eco-champs don't only do the monitoring or data collection, but they are also involved in ecotourism, clearing of hiking trails, compiling an indigenous nursery, and other monitoring work and co-learning together. Also in the Olifants catchment, we have a group of environmental monitors that work with other stakeholders and the Sanbi catchment conveners that are in that catchment in monitoring waste management within the area, doing environmental awareness activities, doing bioblitz on iNaturalist, and also doing stream flow monitoring. Also, as part of our other catchment, the Umgeni catchment in KZN, which does ecological infrastructure for water security project, we've hosted a training session on different tools. We've started iNaturalist projects and hosted some bioblitzes. We've done a wetland assessment tool which assess the wetland ecological condition based on the land cover land use within the area. And we've worked with them in one of the important wetland areas, which is called the Impendle wetland, which is currently submitted as a Ramsar site. And therefore we assisted in monitoring more and feeding into the species lists for the selection of the Ramsar site. We've used, this is the example of the wetland assessment tool, and it's available for sharing, where we just taught people how to read maps, how to assess the land cover, and how to understand the ecological sensitivity and state. How in general Sanbi uses the citizen science data. We use it mostly in the red listing, which is a process where species threat categories updated based on current data. These assessments are repeated over a time period to allow one to determine if a species is becoming more or less threatened. And citizen science field survey data is one of the sources that we use for this. We also use it in the work that we do for our State of the South African Biodiversity Assessment, which is the latest is the 2018 report. So as South Africa, we have chosen mostly iNaturalist in many areas. We are using it, and we've found really the communities growing since 2017 when we joined the iNaturalist. So you can see the number of observers and the observations that have been uploaded, and also participating in activities like the City Challenge and the Global Southern BioBlitz activities that are international. We also use iNaturalist for also doing ecosystem observations. And we also use iNaturalist to monitor invasive species and yeah. So for us, that we've just noticed that citizen science has a big value considering the lack of resources that we have. We have noticed the growth of technology, and we've tried to create mobile applications that can be used by these environmentalists and environmental champions. We've also noticed that South Africa has a well-established culture of citizen science contributing to our biodiversity and other things. And we need to work more with the youth and the other previously disadvantaged group to transfer indigenous knowledge and to also change how people interact with nature in order to foster these activities of further monitoring. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to you, Namla, for bringing such great examples from the ground, but also from actively engaging young people. We are very grateful for that. We would like to also thank to the people who are exchanging their opinions and their questions in the chat. We would love to bring them on board, but we are sadly a bit behind the schedule. So I would like to remind our next panelists that you have 5 minutes to share your experiences, and well, we hope that we won't be so late on the schedule. I would like to invite our next panelist then. Our next panelist is Dominic Elberg. Dominic is a nature conservationist, a famous electronic musician, and artist all in one. He's a book author, a game developer, and guest researcher at the Museum of Natural History in Berlin. And he will tell us how he uses music and art as joyful vectors to access new grounds for raising awareness. So, a very interesting talk coming. Welcome, Dominic.
Hi, Mima. Thanks for the invitation. I have my wife with me, this Natalia, because we have a lot of stuff to show you. Maybe you can see it. Maybe Natalia is also doing the design, the artwork. Maybe you can tell something about the game.
Yeah, for example, we have this game. It's a bird game, and it's for us an easy tool to bring awareness to native birds we have in Germany. And we typically use an artistic and playful way to create an easy access for beings to our nature.
Yeah, and the thing is, we only protect what we appreciate, what we love, and I think for me the positivity is the key to secure our life insurance. And for this, I'm working on different levels, like the book I wrote, Microorganisms Everywhere. It's about the miracles in front of our house door, because you only detect or can see or hear what you are aware of. And Natalia did all the design. It was even elected as the Science Book of the Year in Germany. But for me, nature is the greatest artist of all. I use it as my source of inspiration. This was my last album. It's called Avichrome. It's about the colors you find in birds. Maybe you can open it, Natalia. So each track is named after a bird species. And there it was even in the German music charts, the top 40. And I'm smuggling in informations about the degree of the threat of our biodiversity. So how many bird species we have and how threatened they are. And this is for me very important, because we're living in a populistic system, and things will only change if we gain a majority for those topics. And like people who participate in this meetings, like something like this, or go into a museum of natural history, they know a lot about this, but the meadows we've never been before are the most juicy one, I always say. And so I use music and art as a vector to gather new grounds of raising awareness. Or for example, before it was called mannigfaltig, manifoldness, because we find from each number from 1 till 12 species by its name in Germany. And then I explain all those species. I'm here in Germany, I'm a very famous musician and DJ, and a lot of people, they love my sets. And after my sets on a big festival or on a club night, I do guided nature tours. For example, bat tour, I'm an ambassador for bats, or do ornithologist tours. And this is very important because we gather very new people. But I also want to show you something now. Does it work? It's my, so I'm also doing those kind of music videos to raise awareness. These are the official clips that you can then listen to in the music television. And therefore I always work with other artists. And because I think we are lacking of the right vocabulary to describe the threat of our biodiversity loss, and we cannot solve those problems cognitively. I would say the red lists are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We have not reached any of the 20 goals of the UN Decade of Biodiversity. And I mean, beauty and intelligence in Mother Nature is not something random. It has a purpose, because when we see it, we are loving it, we are appreciating it. And what you see here, I did a video together with a friend. We were collecting native insects, not very tropical. These are very profane insects like gold wasp here. And then we portraited them on eye level, as I would portrait you. And what we then see is the beauty and the miracleness, and we are not treating the insects with the respect they need. They are part of our life insurance. You all know that here 70% of all species in the world are insects, and they are fulfilling ecological system services we are using every day. But a lot of people, they feel disgust when they see insects. They're smashing it with a newspaper during the breakfast, and we are killing it with pesticides. And we killed insects with pesticides for 30 years, and now we are wondering why the insects are gone. And I'm using this video you see here during my sets on big festivals, like where 10, 20,000 people on the stage, and these are the visuals. And then you get a very deep relation to Mother Nature, and then you're starting to laugh at it, and you see it with a different perspective. And this is my aim, not to be too alarmistic, because people stop fighting when they say, it's too much, I cannot change anything. But the positive, the joyful is a very good vector for me, because the joyful, the cheerful is also the essence of biodiversity and of evolution, because life is always exploring on its border. And this is what you see here. How much time do we have left? Nima, how much time do we have left?
Almost over time, but you can finish. It's fine. Take your time to.
Yeah, okay, I'm hurrying up. 5 minutes is way too short. And in the new project I'm doing, maybe you can show here, I am transforming sounds of animals into MIDI data and let them play my synthesizers, and I'm cooperating with an artist, Matthias Garf. Natalia, maybe you can show it. And he's building native fauna out of everyday things, like this was.
Sorry, Dominic, can you put it a little bit up?
A little bit up.
Oh,
yes.
great, thank you.
And then we will have an exhibition with this, where you can hear the sounds of the animals transforming into music. Wait, I have to show you this. 1 second, because then you understand. I hope you can see it. This is a red robin. Do you hear it? Do you hear it? This is the original sound of the red robin. And after 10 seconds, you hear, I transcribed it into MIDI data. All the music you hear here is all composed by the bird. And the red robin is a very versatile singer. It's related close to the nightingale. It can sing 275 different phrases. And those tracks we also play in the radio station. And so nature as an artist, for me it's very important to correct the picture of nature, because in our anthropocentric hybrids we think we are the top of the pops, but humans exist only since 230,000 years. And songbirds, for example, we have on our planet since 33 million years. And this is, I think, very important that we have a holistic view on the things and to correct our perspective. Then we start to understand that we are only a part of the biosphere, that we are related closer to the chimpanzees than the chimpanzees is related to the gorilla, and to understand our position where we are. Okay.
Wow, thanks a lot for this. I think people is fascinating. You can see the reactions on the chat. I think Rita shared a couple of links from your work, but please feel free to also share more links if you want, because I think that people would love to have more time also seeing what you're doing. But thanks a lot for sharing your work, Dominica, to your wife as well. I think that, yeah, we're very, very thankful. This has been so far the most colorful presentation in our panel, I think. And yes, we need to keep with the program, but this has been amazing. Thank you. I will continue with our next panelist, Colin Fontaine from the Museum Natural d'Histoire Naturelle. Colin is a community ecologist working at the CNRS and the scientific coordinator of VG Nature, a meta program that groups biodiversity monitoring programs based on citizen science at the Natural History Museum of Paris. So, Colin, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction. So I'll share my presentation. So, hi, As Mirna just said, so I'm working at the Natural History Museum, and I'm coordinating the Vision Nature program that groups together different biodiversity monitoring programs that are based on citizen science. So you can see here the different monitoring programs that are symbolized by the black circles with the picture of the taxonomic group that is monitored. And then these programs are organized, you see on these different green rectangles, and these correspond to the type of participants that we are targeting. For example, here on the left, you've got programs that are targeting teachers to work with their students in classrooms. Then you've got here programs that are targeting general public, so people that do not have a lot of knowledge about biodiversity when they start. Then you've got programs that are targeting naturalists. And then on the right, you've got programs that are targeting professionals. So either people that manage green spaces in urban cities or farmers. And today I'm going to present you results from two programs that are targeting the general public. So just before showing the results, I'm wanting to present all these programs are have the same general functioning, where you've got a cooperation between researcher and participants. So the researcher provide to the participants some protocols that say how to what to observe in nature. So the participants then observe, count, or measure biodiversity, and give their observation and their data back to the researcher to analyze them. The researcher will then transmit the results to the participant, and the circles can go around. And what I want to present today are more on the right part, on the green circle. And we were wondering to what extent the fact of observing nature in such citizen science program could affect the knowledge of the participant toward biodiversity, as well as their practices toward biodiversity. So the first example I want to show you is come from a monitoring program of plant pollinator interactions. So basically, what to do if you want to participate, what is the protocol? So you pick a flower wherever you want, whenever you want. Then during 20 minutes, you take pictures of all flower visitors that come to these flowering plants. Then you crop your picture to see nicely the insects. Then you have to identify each insect. So identifying, you do this identification using an identification tool that we developed that allow you to give a name to each insect. So it's not always a species name, but you've got a choice among a bit less than 600 names, and each insect can only go in one category, in one names. And then you upload your collections, so the pictures of the insect, of the flower, and the environment on the website, where observations are validated by experts and as well as commented by other participants. So the fact that we based our observation on photos made it possible to check the identifications that were provided by the observers, and we analyzed how good were these observations. And you can see here the result with the probability of correct identification by the observer here, and here the participation of the observer. So how many observations did he do already? And as you can see, for example, for honeybee, after a bit less than 25 participation, the observer really knows how to recognize a honeybee, but okay, it's not very difficult, but still. And then you can see that for other groups, here you also have an increase in the identification skills of the participants. So it's not that surprising that people that participate to such a program make progress, but it's still nice to be able to quantify it and to show that clearly data that are coming from these long-standing observers are high-quality data. The other example I want to present you come from an observatory of biodiversity in private gardens. So in this observatory, the participants are asked to count butterfly using a standard protocol, but they are also, we ask them also to characterize their garden each year of participation. And we also ask them to characterize their practices in their garden. And what I'm going to present you is not the result about the number of butterfly count, but result regarding the characteristics of the garden and the characteristics of their practices. And what we found is that with participation, the participants tend to increase the nectar offer in their garden, planting new species and species that are nectar-rich species. And also, we've seen that with participation, the participants tend to use less and less pesticide in their garden. And this is especially true for gardens that were not used to grow food. So with this example, we see that being involved in such a biodiversity monitoring program can have an impact on the practices toward nature, favoring biodiversity-friendly practices. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to you, Colin. It has been very interesting and a great example on how citizen science can be so democratic. You don't really need to go to one protected area. You can do citizen science just from your backyard. So that's amazing. Thanks for this. I will our next speaker, Joaquín Cochero from the Instituto de Limnología Argentino. Joaquín Cochero is a biologist and ecologist from Argentina, and here he is going to present a pair, citizen science in freshwater habitats. So thanks, Joaquín, for joining us. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mirna, for the presentation. I'll share the screen. Okay, like Mirna said, I'm a biologist. I work in freshwater ecology. I did my PhD in that a long time ago, and I've worked in water monitoring and pollution monitoring for the past, say, 15 years or so. When we design monitoring programs for, say, a river or a lake, we usually, the first thing that comes to mind is to talk about water quality and biotic quality. We saw some presentations before where they use macroinvertebrates and all the biota inside a river to monitor the quality. But a complete watershed, say, assessment program has to consider some other optics as well, some other dimensions, which requires obviously several disciplines to work together. There's a special part of the watershed health assessment programs that is called the habitat assessment. And in this particular aspect is the one that we wanted to include citizen participation. We've been trying to include citizen participation for the past 6 or 7 years. That's where Pierre comes in. That's the name of the project. In this project, we encourage users or participants to help assess the habitat quality of freshwater environments. And they do that by engaging through a mobile application. And we also have some educational resources, particularly for schools. Very briefly, the idea behind the mobile application is a data collection application. We get the geographical coordinates, we get the time and dates from the phone, and the participants are guided through a series of surveys or questionnaires that are actually standard questionnaires that we usually use in watershed monitoring. They are let's say the professional version of the surveys, but they're made a little bit more interactive and with this graphic design in mind, so people can interact easier with it. What users are doing by doing that is they're creating, or they're calculating a habitat index that has been calibrated for several freshwater environments in Argentina, particularly, that ranges from very bad to very good. So they get an idea of how degraded or how well preserved freshwater habitat is. They're fishing, maybe they're having a day, they're spending some time, and they can tell how degraded it is. They also have some indicators of which factors are actually contributing to that index. They have the descriptions and everything. So through the mobile app, they can also, it's linked to the iNaturalist API. In Argentina, we have an iNaturalist node that is called Argentinat. It holds, so they can learn about the biota, the flower, the fauna, and the flora around them. They have some mini games for younger people as well. And all gathered information is centralized in a single server, along with photos of the sites, and it's all validated remotely by experts. So the entire data, all the data, the source code for the application, everything is open source and it's all free. We also have some educational resources, like I mentioned, for schools particularly, that teachers can download and they can print them, and they can use it along with the application in their classroom to learn about these environments and about their conservation status. This project was one of the first ones that started in Argentina that included digital tools in community monitoring or in citizen science. It started in 2016. We've had around 900 surveys from different sites from throughout the country, and some of them also from the rest of South America that have been sent. They are validated. And one of the interesting things with this project that we find very, very exciting is that last year we got the attention of the United Nations Development Program, and they wanted to collaborate with us into building sort of a new project based on this tool, a rebranding of sorts. We called it Preservamos, which in English it would be something like "we preserve" or something like that. In this new project, we want to see how the data that we collect along with citizen participants is actually translated, or if it is translated or not, to local public policies, which has been very challenging. So we're dealing directly in this new project with local policy makers. So that's my 5-minute alarm. Local policy makers to try to see if the data that we've been gathering and the engagement we've been getting from participants in the citizen science project actually do translate to local policies. And there's the websites and everything. They'll be sharing the slides later, but both projects essentially aim for the same goal in just different aspects. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your time and for the invitation.
Gracias, Joaquin, and thanks for sticking to the time and presenting this very interesting application. This is what we need, innovative, creative tools, open access that can allow us to engage further in these initiatives. So thanks a lot. I'm excited to see how the app works. I am about to download it, if possible. Thanks a lot. I will introduce you to our next panelist, and our last panelist, who is Juan Carlos Caicedo from Colombia, from Grupo Comunitario. He's a citizen scientist. Juan Carlos Caicedo is from citizen scientist. Juan Carlos Caicedo is an ecologist and scientific coordinator for Grupo Comunitario, a Bogota-based NGO that promotes the generation of ecological knowledge to guide best management practices for urban green areas for biodiversity, climate resilience, and human well-being. His case study will briefly cover how neighborhoods using citizen science are transforming an understudied area on Bogota into a government-prioritized urban ecological corridor. Sounds like a very interesting case study, so thanks, Juan Caicedo, for joining us.
Thanks, Mirna, and thanks, everybody. I'm very glad to be here with you. Let me share my screen. And thanks to all the presenters. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is an example from Bogota, Colombia, where a little bit different than the other presentations that we've seen today is really a grassroots bottom-up initiative to understand the biodiversity in the city and to get the city and the different universities to consider the biodiversity that we have in their management practices. So from Bogota, Colombia, it's the capital of one of the most biodiverse cities or biodiverse countries in the world. And what's very interesting is that here in the city, in the capital, there's very little known about what the biodiversity is, what lives in the city, what they need to survive, and how management practices can innovate to incorporate that biodiversity. So this is an example of neighbors of a small group of citizens taking pictures, video, or audio of the biodiversity that we have here in the area through bio-blitzes, city nature challenges, Christmas bird counts, etc. And how high quality documentation can really lead to a very wide-ranging and in-depth inventory of the biodiversity in the city. So here, in the city of Bogota, they have different environmental regulations or norms that they're trying to do is connect the main protected areas in the city throughout the city. So on the far right of this map, we have the protected forest of the Cerros Orientales. On the far left, we have the Rio Bogota, the Bogota River. And like in many cities, we have these green corridors that go through them. And each one, and what we do is we divide the watershed, the Rio, in this case, the Rio Salitre watershed, into different segments. Each one will have a different social and ecological planning strategy. For example, number 7 here is the largest urban wetland in the city, and it's city managed. So that's going to have a certain strategy. Number 6, right next to it, is a private country club and golf course. And so there you have a board of directors, it's a different situation. Number 4 here, for example, is the military cadet school. And so there's a totally different social situation. You'll be talking to generals, military personnel. What I want to focus on today is what's marked in red. This section of the city that there'd never been inventories of the biodiversity in this area. And we have a mixture of protected and non-protected green spaces. So this were some of the maps that we do with the community. And so this red area here is almost 300 hectares in area. And what we do with the community and with the neighbors when we walk through this area is to start thinking about how all of these different types of public and private green spaces work together to form these larger ecological corridors. So when we talk to them, we also think about linear habitats and patch habitats. And so in this area, we have different riparian corridors, we have different street corridors, and then we have different patches, different parks that we divide for parks that are over 1 hectare and under 1 hectare. And also within this area that you can't see here in the map, a lot of other types that are critical, particularly gardens. We have well over 1,000 square meters of private gardens here in the area. A growing number of green roofs, green facades on the buildings, ornamental water features. And we want to really get an idea of how all these areas can work together. So something when we first started here in the city, traditionally and historically has looked at all these green spaces independently. Every park is managed independently from every other one. So this is the first time, and just to reiterate, this is a community-based map where once everybody in the city, in the citizens, in the universities see this map of all these areas working together is how we've been able to move this process along and achieve several of these important innovations here in the city of Bogota. So going to now a little bit more of what do we find here through citizen science, through iNaturalist, through eBird in particular. The first column on the left are the main groups that we're studying. The second column are the numbers of species in general, well over 1,200 species in this highly urbanized area, which is pretty astounding. And here's different examples of the type of photography that we develop here in this area. So we can get very high quality identifications of these species. And then the last column of that table is to take these species lists and continue to analyze it. And so one of the first things that we do is to see what's native, what's exotic, what's resident, what's migratory, and then what does this fauna in these public areas, what do they need to live? What are they feeding on and how are they reproducing in the area? So that first column is an example of one of those of the ways to look at it. So what is all the fauna that visits flowers, in particular for nectar and pollen? And we see there's 250 species there. So it's one of our main groups. And then when we work with the city, work with the universities of how to manage these green areas, this is one of our main strategies, a multi-species, multi-strata landscape. So on the bottom left is how we can combine species of in the gardens, shrubs, trees, to develop those vertical strata. And how can we have food production of nectar, pollen, fruits, seeds, and host plants throughout the year. In the bottom right is those two concepts combined, where you can follow any one of these trees throughout the year as they produce nectar, fruits, seeds, and how different species of fauna will react to that. So to conclude, a couple of key accomplishments, the high quality baseline information, a lot of education and outreach. There's an interinstitutional working group. We have all the different government agencies and universities and residents working together to combine forces to move this corridor along. A series of habitat enrichment pilot projects, including the reduction of pesticide use, reduced light pollution, nest boxes, dead wood, etc. University research projects to take citizen science to even another level, especially with groups like moths and flies that need laboratories to do a proper identification. And then as new protected areas that we've been able to declare here based on citizen science. And as I said at the beginning, this example has been so successful that now the city of Bogota has declared this polygon a prioritized ecological corridor for the city. So thanks again for the invitation, and hopefully you can have more questions further along. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Juan. You already have some comments and questions in the chat. This has been very interesting, especially in such a populated area like Bogota. As Cindy said, but in Bogota was hardly credible before this experience. So thanks for making this change. It's very important. Well, with you as a last panelist, I think we have a very little time left for questions and answers, but still we would love to hear some reactions to any of our panelists' presentations, or if any of you in the audience would like to share an experience from your side on what you are doing with regards to citizen science, please raise your virtual hand and I will be happy to call you to unmute. I think we have time for like 2, max 3 questions or reactions.
Thank you, Mina. Yes, because we are a little bit close to our time to start the third section of our session, we will encourage the speakers to answer the questions that are posted in the chat. Some of you already have done it. Thank you very much for that. And perhaps we can hear from one of the participants if they want to share their experience. We have only 1 minute to do that. Thank you.
I don't see any hands.
So perhaps if you agree, we can continue, Mina, or Mirna? Yes.
Yes, I don't see any hands, but I saw a lot of questions and answers in the chat. So yes, we're very grateful for this very interactive participation and discussion between panelists and audience. This has been a very interesting panel, and it has been an honor for me to moderate.
Well,
thanks for everything.
Yes, thanks to you, and of course to all our speakers and to our participants for this great interaction in the chat. Now I would like to open our last section of this virtual session, where we will exchange experiences and recommendations on the role of citizen science for the comprehensive biodiversity management and decision making, and its role in the achievement of the global biodiversity framework. To lead this final panel, I would like to introduce you to Ms. Anne-Sophie Stevens, Senior Officer of the International Science Council. She works at the interface between science and policy on a number of issues related to biodiversity, risk reduction, and sustainable development. She will be introducing the speakers for this section, and you are, of course, encouraged to use the chat for your questions and comments. Thank you very much, and I'll give the floor to Ms. Anne-Sophie.
Thank you very much, Juanita, and thank you very much to all for being here. We've heard fascinating presentations on citizen science already, many examples, so we'll continue with that theme and look at how we leverage citizen science for policy making to drive policy change in support of the global biodiversity framework and the SDGs more broadly. So we're going from raising awareness, capacity building, education aspects related to citizen science, the data gathering that we've heard a lot about, seeing how do we bring that to translate those insights in policy and help drive the positive change that are embedded in the global agreements. So as been said by Juanita, my name is Anne-Sophie Stevens. I work at the International Science Council, and it's been a privilege to work with CBD, IUBS, and others over the past 2 years, actually, in the Science Policy Forum, in convening some of the key conversation around key issues for science and for policy around the global biodiversity framework. So we're now looking at the role of citizen science in achieving the step change in how we use, protect, and restore biodiversity and ecosystem functions from local to global scales. So I will ask each panelist to share their experience, their insights on the challenges as well, and the opportunities to leverage that in policy making. So we'll have to keep the time, so 7 minutes for each panelist, so that we have some time for question and answers at the end. I'll first turn to Carlos Galindo Leal. Carlos is General Director of Science Communication at the Mexican National Commission of Biodiversity, CONABIO. In his presentation, he will outline the results of 9 years of experience promoting countrywide citizen science and how the information gathered is being translated in a national biodiversity information system. Carlos, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with you, listening to all these incredible initiatives. And I'm going to share my presentation. Here it is. Okay. I think it's right now in front of you. Here it is. I'm going to start giving you some background, very fast background of what we've done. Basically, we started using iNaturalist, which we call Naturalista in Mexico. 9 years ago, we were the first members of the network, which was very, very interesting. And it's quite important for us in Mexico because we have a very high biodiversity. but at the same time, there is little knowledge about the Mexican society on nature, particularly on the urban public, which is very large. And we believe that people need to know nature to make wise decisions on restoration, conservation, and sustainable management. We have, as I told you, are one of the first members of this incredible network, which is growing. And what we did is we adapted the platform to our needs with the species at risk in Mexico, with municipalities, protected areas, and all the things. Particularly an interesting part is to adapt the common names in Spanish, but also in indigenous languages, so you can find them by different names. We also modify one thing. This is particularly in Mexico. We have two networks, one of tutors, which do workshops almost every week, and we have curators. I'm lost now. Curators. These curators is a network of taxonomists that verify identifications on top of what already the network does, and they help people to identify species. Then one of the, I guess, most difficult part is the promotion of the platform, which we have a number of different strategies, and we can talk more about this, but we do this very often. We change strategies to promote in radio, in TV, in the news, the platform. And as we have passed, we now have over 100,000 participants, 4 million observations, and more than 40,000 species records. But also the platform is used by people, not only the participants, but just for general public in an incredible way. You can see here a million visits every month. So it's a source of a lot of information for the general public. And what I want to hear, you have the statistics that I showed you before, but here is what I want to highlight is the 5,000 projects. We have over 5,000 projects in Naturalista, which deal with many different topics. And these are some of the topics. There is a variety of applications, like from the science point of view, the discovery of new species and records, which has already been very useful for that. But also we use it for the information on early warning for agricultural and forest pests. We are also using it for human disease vectors by some of the government institutions. We use it for information on endangered species, very much on invasives, because most of the records of invasive species are recent, and so scientific records usually are not as recent, but also as tools for nature tourism. In fact, we are using it for certification of areas that are private, voluntary, protected areas, and they use iNaturalist for certification by having their inventories. But I guess the main issue here is that all these records from citizen science become part of the Mexican biodiversity information system and are available to the public through this other platform that we developed, which is called Enciclovida. So not only iNaturalist, but also eBird, all the records joined here together with all the scientific records that Conavio has collected for 30 years. So we have about 20 to 30 million records of 100,000 species. And the advantage of having all centered in this platform is that the platform is a government platform. It's Conavio is the authority on biodiversity in Mexico. So this information is very valuable for many different groups. And the platform that we developed, which is Enciclovida, you can search species by different languages, many languages, including Chinese, Japanese, but also by common names and many common names. You can do searches by state, municipality, and protected area, and you can create digital field guides of plants and animals for every single municipality in Mexico, which we have 2,600 and 180 protected areas. You can do that in less than 1 minute, make a field guide. And so here is an example of the information that goes into this platform. You have the example of the Quetzal, where you have records of eBird and you have records of scientific records in purple. And so these web pages are created on the fly. At the moment that you select the species or the region, it creates the web pages. And so every time the web pages are updated, and it brings information with APIs from a number of sites, including IUCN, including Cornell, Missouri Botanical Garden. You can see videos, you can see songs of birds. So it's a very complete platform. And we have also an app for the platform. And basically, this is a way you can make a field guide in 1 minute. You search by your region, the group that you're interested, and then you send the field guide to your email, and then you get it in your phone, and you have a field guide. But basically, I guess the main point is that the information of citizen science is going to the main repository of the Authority on Biodiversity in Mexico, which is CONABIO. And in that way, it becomes very important information for everyone. We have, as I told you right now, over 4 million records, which is quite amazing compared to the work of 30 years, which the work of 30 years of gathering scientific information, scientific records, is equivalent to about 25 million records. So I guess in a few years, citizen science information is going to pass scientific information, not for every species, but for many of them. So basically, I guess the issue is how you get the citizen science information into policy. In our case, it's easier because we are a government organization, and basically we are the Authority on Biodiversity in Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos, also for emphasizing the importance of co-producing knowledge, including on threats with people, for them to become good stewards, and also how that feeds into the national monitoring and in turn can be used for developing tools on the ground. Thank you very much. I will now turn to Claire Burnel from the Museum of Natural History in France, where she works in the Conservation Biology Lab. Claire is conducting a sociological study of 2 biodiversity indicators produced from citizen science program to support biodiversity conservation. Claire, over to you.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'll try to share my screen now. There you go. So my name is Claire, and I work in sociology, as you said, and I work at the French National Museum of Natural History in the Conservation Biology Lab, as you said. And currently I'm conducting a sociological study regarding 2 biodiversity indicators that are produced from data that's collected through a citizen science program. It's called Vigie Nature, and actually you've heard of it earlier from Colin Fontaine, who also works at the museum, and he described it to you in his presentation. So the idea is that ever since the Rio conference in 1992, Europe has put a big emphasis on biodiversity indicators as a way to try and build accurate and useful policies to protect nature. And so these indicators give simplified information about species, much like an unemployment curve, for example, would give simplified information about a country's rate of employed versus unemployed people. And so today the idea is very well implanted that having more and more knowledge about nature helps make better decisions in order to protect it. And so indicators are also supposed to enable governments to assess if the targets that are put in place within these policies are actually met or not. And so as such, environmental citizen science is really recognized today as a very efficient and reliable way to collect large-scale data about biodiversity, from which then robust indicators can be produced. And so then these indicators are spread to the general public through the media, but also towards the national and international environment agencies and institutions. But the issue is that the way that these biodiversity indicators actually circulate in the administration and the way they're used to actually design biodiversity policies is largely unknown. And so my work contributes to try and fill this gap by studying the trajectory of 2 biodiversity indicators that are produced by the research lab that I work for. One is called STOC, so that's temporal monitoring for common birds, and it follows the trends of specialist birds in 3 environments. So that's urban birds, forest birds, and farmland birds. And the other one is called Vigikiro, and it follows the trends of various bat species. So what you need to know is that in France, the production of these indicators is funded by the French Ministry of Ecology. And there's a dedicated agency, which is the National Biodiversity Observatory, that was created in 2011. And their work is to assess and publish official biodiversity indicators, which the 2 that I'm studying are a part of. And so in this context, my goal was to focus on the actual use of these indicators by policymakers through about 20 interviews that I conducted with, first of all, members of the French Ministry of Ecology, but also with scientists and with members of the National Biodiversity Observatory. And so the thing is that this work actually highlights the very limited use of these indicators in public policy making. And more precisely, it shows that these indicators are mainly used as strategic tools for various stakeholders, which is not really the intended purpose that they're initially produced for. And more importantly, it should be said that it took me several months of thorough investigation to find out the way they're actually used. So not only is it that the way they're not really used the way they're intended to be used, but it's so unclear and vague that there's no clear path to follow in order to understand how policymakers actually use them. So ultimately, the goal by the end of my study is to try and deduce possible levers for better use of these biodiversity indicators to try and design environmental public policies. So I'm not there yet in my work, but I will just try to summarize quickly the different ways that I've seen them being actually used. So as I said, when I was interviewing policymakers, I was told that they put funds into producing these indicators because they're supposed to guide and evaluate policies. But the exact way that they could be used for that is unclear in itself to policymakers. So they talk about prioritizing, quantifying, etc., but they can never really give me like a practical example. And the only tangible uses of the 2 indicators that I'm studying that I've actually witnessed are, as I've said before, not really the uses they were intended for. So I'm going to give 2 examples, one for each indicator. So the one concerning common birds is mainly used for what we call the organic law on finance laws. So here the indicator is used as a way for policymakers to show what policies on biodiversity protection they have put in place during the year and if they were useful or not. And it also allows them to ask for more budget from the Treasury in order to put more policies in place for the year to come. And for scientists, this indicator is a way to show to the Ministry of Ecology that the work that they do is useful and that they should also get funds in order to keep going. All right. And then the indicator concerning bats is used in a different way, which is pretty indirect. So it shows that windmills cause very high mortality among certain bat species. And so it's often criticized by wind power companies. And so even though it doesn't necessarily stop them from constructing their windmills in areas where they might be dangerous for bats, the very fact that this indicator exists actually forces them to take into account this bat mortality. And then residents associations can also use it to protest windmills implementation themselves. So in conclusion, the main issue with these indicators is that everyone kind of keeps saying that they're essential for guiding and evaluating policies, even though my work shows that they're not quite used that way. But it seems that no one questions this assertion anymore because it's very well implanted and it has been for a very long time. And so it explains why no one is truly able to tell me precisely how they can be used, but they still keep funding them so they can keep being produced. So all of that doesn't mean that they're useless tools when it comes to policymaking. I've mentioned how they can actually influence political decisions, even when they're not clearly used. But my hope by the end of my study is to find practical ways to make them directly useful and more useful to policymaking in order to get closer to an efficient protection and conservation of biodiversity. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, for a very interesting perspective on looking at how effectively that data is being used and what are the factors that affect that use or not, because in the end it's about making that useful, usable and used. Very interesting perspective. Thank you for that. So next speaker is Erizo Andrianandrasana. Erizo is a conservation practitioner from Madagascar. He will talk about his assessment of monitoring possibilities ranging from scientist-driven to those undertaken by local people for the proposed indicators of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Erizo, the floor is yours. I think you're muted. You need to unmute.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it is a great pleasure to be here giving this talk on behalf of a group of 3 people, including Finn Danielsen from Nordeco in Copenhagen, and Neil Burgess from WCMC unit from Cambridge. So I will be talking about the opportunities for public involvement in monitoring the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Oh, sorry. Seems like my slide doesn't. Yeah, great. As you know, our rural communities rely strongly on natural resources to survive. What is the case especially in developing countries? Unfortunately, the nature is disappearing, and that is a problem. And for many years, I've been involved in important participatory ecological monitoring programs in Madagascar, and I was personally involved in training of more than 400 local patrollers in Madagascar, and they are running patrol in a weekly basis across some protected areas. We have 125 protected areas in Madagascar, and we understand that these community patrollers, they are the eyes and also the ears of the protected areas, so they are incredibly important, and the data collected by the local monitors are important for developing the management plan, for developing the zoning, and also for implementing the conservation work in this country. And I had the opportunity to build the capacity of these patrollers, and they were really motivated. So what we did here, what I want to talk about here is that the work I did with Finn and with Neil, we mapped different monitoring types onto the proposed CBD indicators, ranging from scientist driven to those undertaken by local communities. So for each indicator, we assessed the main constraints to the involvement of local stakeholders. And you can see myself in this picture what was in the southwestern Madagascar, and you can see the local people looking at me, and they are listening. They are happy to learn how to save wildlife, and they are incredibly motivated to receive the sort of to communicate and sort of instruction on how to save wildlife. So what we found after mapping these indicators, what we found was that of the proposed 291 indicators, 55% of them require monitoring by scientists, and 45%, that is 134 of them, can benefit from the involvement of local communities. So what we did was that for each indicator we looked at, can it be, so measuring the indicator, can it be done by scientists only without involvement of local communities? Can it be led by professional scientists with participation of local communities? Or can it be led by local communities with a bit of participation of scientists? So what is the type of classification that we used? We identified some main constraints to the involvement of local stakeholders. For example, we identified our results suggested that 58% of indicators requires a national overview, and 56% of indicators, so measuring them, require very technically difficult and requires some analytical skills, maybe some statistics, some Excels, and what is a little bit of a challenge for local stakeholders. And 52% of indicators requires detailed knowledge of the administrative aspects in the country. And we also found out that some less frequent constraints. For example, the dependence. So 33% of indicators require some dependence on area-based information, such as GIS, such as remote sensing approaches, while 12% requires data from herbaria and museums, and that is a bit of challenge. So the key findings of our research are presented in this graph. You can see in the x-axis what is the percentage of indicators, of indicators what is suitable for involvement of local studies. In red here, the top right in the corner, the top right, what is the most suitable? So now please look at the blue triangle, the blue circle, and the blue square. You can see that for the headland indicators, what is the triangle? The headland indicators were more suitable than the in terms of local stakeholder involvement. But even for these, the potential for local involvement is lower than it was for the CBD plan for 2010-2020, what had the IC targets. So you can see that the CBD it falls in the top right corner. That means most suitable, not only for data gathering but also for data analysis. But for the post-2020 CDP framework, it is suitable for data gathering, but not for data analysis. So that is something we want to address. So we strongly recommend, we encourage governments and multilateral organizations to promote community-based and citizen science approaches. And we strongly believe that this could enrich the monitoring and link the monitoring to awareness raising and also linked to enhanced decision-making at all levels of natural resources management. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erizo, for presenting that initiative, and impressive to see how you're looking at the requirements to meet to gather the data for the indicators across actually not only the global biodiversity framework but other global agreements, and how do you actually systematically look at opportunities for bottom-up engagement. So very good, and I see also discussions in the chat and questions for you, actually clarification questions. So we'll move on to our next presentation, which is going to be a joint presentation. Antonio Moro Sareva is a full professor at University of Sao Paulo, working on biodiversity informatics and recently on planetary health, and is a co-founder of the Brazilian Citizen Science Network, together with Natalia Guilardi Lopez, who is a biologist, associate professor at the Federal University of ABS, working on environmental education and citizen science research, and also co-founder of the Brazilian Citizen Science Network. So they're going to jointly present on the role of citizen science in Brazil, and how the newly created Citizen Science Network is working to foster the growth of citizen science in research, in education, funding, and policy. Over to you both.
Thank you so much, Anne-Sophie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for all the organizers for inviting us to be here and to contribute to this discussion. Natalia and I will share some ideas with you, focusing on the role, opportunities, and challenges of our Brazilian Citizen Science Network, or RBCC, Rede Brasileira de Ciência Cidadã in Portuguese, to integrate citizen science into policies in Brazil. Well, the importance of citizen science for biodiversity monitoring and for raising awareness and promoting education is well known, and we saw many great examples today. That is even more true for a large, mega-diverse and developing country like Brazil, which hosts between 15 and 20% of the world's biological diversity. However, we have many data gaps taxonomic-wise, and we also have many data gaps from a geographic point of view due to the larger size of the country. The knowledge of species richness, species composition, and endemism in Brazilian biodiversity is strongly spatially biased. There's a positive correlation between the density of access routes and the density of species distribution records. On the upper map, you may see in orange and red mainly places where more accessibility is available, most of them close to the coast. In the lower maps, you may see that those same places have much more occurrence records. And funding to address those gaps may never be enough, considering the size of the country, the cost of getting those data, and the accessibility of sites for monitoring. The current scenario is even worse due to political bias and the economic situation. Citizen science can be a strategy in the country, not only to address the challenges of biodiversity mapping and monitoring, but also as a way to gather people around the biodiversity theme, fostering opportunities for scientific education and civic engagement and stewardship. Although we can refer to citizen participation in Brazil for more than a century in unique programs like the Butantan Institute receiving live snakes sent by citizens to produce antidotes, there is a lack of tradition of public participation in scientific research in Brazil. Also, there is a lack of financial support to science in general, not only for citizen science. And we basically have some independent researchers or institutions promoting citizen science activities and research in an independent and unintegrated manner. However, at the same time, Brazilian people show a high interest in science, despite the difficulties in accessing and understanding scientific terms and outcomes sometimes. Also, our people present a natural willingness to participate in collective activities.
Well, good morning. So given this scenario presented by Saraiva, RBCC was created in 2021 by a group of scientists of different Brazilian universities to help realize the potential of citizen science in Brazil. Some of the objectives of the network are, among others, to map and produce a database of Brazilian citizen science initiatives, to collaborate in the elaboration of public policies to support citizen science research and practice in Brazil, to support and offer citizen science training courses for different social actors, and to articulate with funding agencies to support research initiatives using the citizen science approach. In March 2021, at a two-day online workshop, we discussed issues related to citizen science in Brazil, namely financial sustainability, technology and data quality, inter and transdisciplinary infrastructure, as well as engagement and good practices. Based on these discussions, we produced an open letter. In this letter, we identified some factors that may opportunely count in favor for the expansion of citizen science in the country, such as RBCC adopts a broad definition of citizen science, summed with principles and values clearly publicized. This allows our network to be inclusive to a variety of citizen science initiatives, both those already existing or still to be created. In Brazil, there are many institutions converting projects for the society into projects with the society, focusing on scientific culture instead of only on the scientific knowledge. Also, there is a great demand by project coordinators and the general public for spaces and opportunities for training in the field of citizen science. However, many challenges and barriers need to be overcome for the consolidation of citizen science in Brazil, such as the broad concept of citizen science is still not fully understood in the country. For example, some people still do not understand the differences among the concepts of citizen science, science communication, and environmental education. There is a lack of access to technologies and internet for less favored social actors in Brazil. And finally, metrics and indicators that allow for a proper evaluation of scientists who work with citizen science are still scarce, hindering the interest of scientists in working with the theme. Well, I mentioned here only some of the opportunities and challenges identified in our letter. If you are interested, you can access its full content at this link. We consider that a way to overcome these identified challenges could be to integrate citizen science into funding, educational, institutional, and academic career policies. And we believe our BCC is proving to be an important way to bring to the table several stakeholders to help advance citizen science in Brazil. Thank you all for your attention. Here are our contacts, and we are available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you both. Very interesting to the way you've articulated the co-benefits of citizen participation in scientific research for better understanding the science process, as well as motivating community-based conservation projects. So thank you very much to you both. So we'll move on to our next speaker. André Madère works at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies in the Environmental Policy Research Institute. He heads IGES unit on biodiversity and forests. André will be talking about how citizen science has improved our understanding of invasive alien species and how it could do even more in the future. André, over to you.
Thanks very much, Anne-Sophie, and hi everybody. Greetings from Japan. So one thing I just want to mention is that it's actually not relevant to the talk, but we are at IGES hosting the IPBES technical support unit for the ongoing assessment on invasive alien species, which is kind of winding down now. It's got about a year left to go. But this is about something completely different. It's just a small study that we did a couple of years ago on, as the title suggests, citizen science and invasive alien species. And I realize that's a very broad topic, but I'll get into the details in a moment. So, okay, that's interesting. Part of my slide has disappeared. Okay. So just by way of background, I don't think I need to say too much about this. I think everyone's pretty familiar with invasive alien species as a global concern requiring a global response. And I think partly for that reason, citizen science has an important role to play. So despite the challenges with the quality of citizen science and vetting of citizen science information in some cases, it does have an enormous quantity advantage. Another challenge, however, is the fragmentation challenge, which I think has also been quite comprehensively covered in these talks today. But this whole idea of how this data gets to a central point, or how it gets to a point where it's accessible to the largest number of people and institutions. So what we did was looked at peer-reviewed papers that used citizen science data for their research. So that was kind of the filter through which we conducted this study. And in these papers, we looked for their contributions to new knowledge on invasive alien species. We looked at the geographic and taxonomic scope that they covered, the data parameters that they covered, and to what extent they were sharing data between initiatives and with other initiatives. So we started off with 198 papers, filtered that down to 117 relevant ones, but only 31 of those had some kind of ICT, information communication technology type interface. So that's mostly cell phone apps and other kind of digital interfaces. And of those 31, those 31 covered 26 different initiatives. I'll show those different initiatives in a slide a little later, but I won't get into the individuals too much. And there were various instances in which the data contributed to new discoveries and predictions. In most cases, this was, as can be expected, spatial distribution of species, contributing mostly to presence data of species. And by the way, these bullets of mine are in the opposite order to the figure above. Apologies for that, but you can follow that one from bottom to top as I go down on with the bullet list. And then in 6 cases, there were new discoveries made regarding behavioral or phenological characteristics of invasive alien species. One example was that by studying audio recordings of yellowhammer birds in their native UK and invaded New Zealand habitats, it was discovered that song dialects that had disappeared from the native habitat still persisted in the invaded habitat. And then there were another 6 cases in which new methodological or data issues related to citizen science data were identified. For example, it was discovered that certain data parameters essential to reporting plant species abundance were rarely reported by volunteers, which limited the utility of the data. In another 5 cases, spatio-temporal patterns of a species invasion were clarified. For example, by studying citizen sightings of monk parakeets, it was found that the species spread widely throughout Mexico after an increase in pet imports. That was in the early 2010s. And then lastly, in 2 cases, the spatial distribution of invasive alien species was modeled using citizen observations. And one of those examples was a regression model that was used to predict the habitat suitability of wild boar in Denmark, based partly on citizen science initiative observations. So that was kind of how they contributed qualitatively. This is just the distribution of those studies very briefly. Most of them, as you can see, national, surprisingly few global of the ones that we looked at. One quick disclaimer here is that these are only English studies, so there's a fair amount that was probably lost as a result of language. And I've already heard of a few initiatives which I would have expected to see here, and I think it's probably because of language that they're not. A very notable exception here is in Asia, where we're based. Not a single one made it through the filter of the study. So partly explainable through language, but probably not only because of that. This just shows the similarity between initiatives. So the parameters we looked at, all 26 required species name, or at least had it either required or optional. 4 of those were optional, 22 were required. Latitude, longitude coordinates, as you can imagine, with cell phone apps and that kind of thing, that was a very common one. Species abundance information, also an obviously common one, and then it kind of goes down the list. And then on the right-hand side here, the figure just shows that the average overlap between initiatives was about 73%. And in 14 cases there, those very dark green ones are where there was complete overlap in the data requirements. So a pretty substantial amount of similarity between initiatives. But then when you look at the data sharing between initiatives, so these are all of the initiatives that you can see here, plus one additional one, which I'm sure you've all heard of in the top right over there. Only 54% of them were sharing with at least one of the other ones, or with a central authority or central initiative. And in this case, that central initiative, not one of the 26, but that initiative is GBIF, which Tim will tell you all about in a moment, directly after me. So that, yeah, GBIF was the initiative that was kind of linked to the most others. And as you can see with the blue arrows here, not too many links between the different initiatives, and some of them are entirely isolated, sometimes because their objectives were very specific, but other times because of possibly a lost opportunity. So just about consolidating invasive alien species observations, because this data is available digitally, it means that it is somewhere online. It's kind of accessible in some or other way. And in a study in 2010, some authors came up with the 77% figure out of 249 invasive alien species citizen science initiatives, saying that they're willing to share data. So the willingness is there as well. And then 87% of biodiversity citizen science initiatives more generally made data available via public download, according to a later study. In our study, I mentioned the 54% just now. Of the remaining percentage, some were shared passively and others not at all. By passive sharing, I mean that they're available online. So in terms of consolidating of data, to facilitate large-scale analysis, there are three kind of areas in which this needs to happen, and this is kind of the conclusion of our study. Firstly, geographic information consolidation, in which initiatives could aim to contribute data to other initiatives with broader or at least equivalent geographical scope, within which the smaller initiative is included. And then species information consolidation, in which initiatives could aim to contribute data to other initiatives with broader or, again, equivalent taxonomic scope, within which that smaller initiative fits. And then lastly, data parameter consolidation, in which an initiative could aim to contribute data to other initiatives that are collecting at least the same set of parameters, provided that the key data parameters as determined by the smaller initiative are included in the broader initiative to avoid losing information. So just final thoughts to wrap up here. And this is really just complete coincidence that Tim is talking directly after me, but one of the conclusions of the study was that GBIF is playing a very important role here. But as Tim will probably mention, GBIF doesn't have a facility that citizens can contribute directly to the GBIF database. So it needs to be done through some other initiative. And iNaturalist is probably the most diverse of these, maybe not the largest number of observations, I'm not sure, but probably the most diverse in terms of global and taxonomic scope. So that came up as an important way of contributing to this global initiative. And just generally, we put in our kind of conclusions that it would be helpful if other initiatives fed into broader initiatives, and if criteria were also more standardized. So there's a fairly good 73% overlap of criteria of parameters, but that could be higher as well. And then just one last little bit of suggestion here was that it could be worthwhile to investigate how citizen science data, for example, on invasive alien species, can be incorporated into broader citizen science initiatives like OpenStreetMap. And this could lead to better analysis of the relationships between species observations and land use features. So the lead author of this paper is working quite a lot on this kind of thing. We'll see what that yields in future. And then at the bottom of the page there, I hear that we'll all receive these presentations, so you can just follow the link if any of you are interested in delving a bit deeper into the paper. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, André, for being open about the challenges that remain around collaboration and sharing, and the key key theme in your presentation around consolidation. I think that's a very important takeaway, and the role potentially of GBIF and also global assessment, like the best assessment in actually filling some of that gap. So thank you very much. So our last presenter is Tim Hirsch. Tim is Deputy Director of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility and leads the participation and engagement team based in Copenhagen. He's going to outline the critical role of citizen science in generating the records brought together in GBIF's data infrastructure that has multiple uses in biodiversity research and reporting on indicators to support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Tim, welcome.
Thank you so much, Anne-Sophie. And can I check, first of all, that you're seeing my presentation? Okay. As Andre noted, this follows on very nicely from his talk. It wasn't prearranged, but it's worked out very well. What I hope to demonstrate as the last speaker here is really the way in which all of the fantastic initiatives that we've heard about and tremendous diversity we've heard from all over the world, that as well as serving the very important purposes in their own right, that value is greatly multiplied when these initiatives are brought together into a single knowledge base, such as GBIF. Just a quick reminder that GBIF is an intergovernmental network, so we've been around for 20 years. And we bring together now, as you can see from our homepage, really quite large volumes of data, so a little bit over 2 billion species occurrence records coming through from more than 1,800 institutions and networks from over 130 countries. Now, when you look at the overall distribution map of, this is simply the concentration of records that are coming through GBIF, species occurrence records, something which is always very obvious when you look at that is the hotspots of where the records are in red are not the hotspots of biodiversity. They are, frankly, indicators of citizen science, to put it crudely. They are the areas of the highest concentration of volunteer observers already coming through GBIF. And that's demonstrated by the fact, I'll go on to some numbers in a minute, but just to show that GBIF brings together, acts as a kind of a broker for data that's coming from a very wide variety of different sources. So from museums and from scientific research projects, but as you'll see from that left semicircle, citizen science is already one of the sources of data that's coming through, and through a standardized process can then be brought into active use for a wide range of research, but also for policy, including use in indicators through the CBD, as well as, for example, species risk assessments through IUCN. So that's the kind of the chain of value that goes from bringing this data together and many onward uses. So look at some of these numbers. These are just the top 10 data sets that are coming through into GBIF that are largely associated with citizen science. And of course, the big one, the huge one in terms of numbers is the eBird observation data set of more than 1 billion records. But then you'll see several other extremely large citizen science data sets coming through from different parts of the world, including iNaturalist research grade observations, which come through into GBIF with regular updates. And look at the total at the bottom. That adds up to more than 1.3 billion records. So just in terms of the number of records, something like 62% are coming from just these top 10 data sets. If you then bring in all of the other sort of long tail of citizen science data sets, it comes to something like 68%. So look at the names of those data sets, and you will probably easily come to the impression that what's really being shared is bird data. And if you look at the total taxonomic distribution of everything, this is just those 10 data sets compiled, and you look at the taxonomic chart, indeed, it looks like almost nearly all of it is birds, rather 93% of what's in there are bird records. However, once you drill down into it, you see that distribution starting to open up a little bit. For example, if you take out just that one data set of eBird, you're seeing still a domination of birds, but at least you're starting to see insects and flowering plants within that pie chart on the right. But still a great dominance of birds. If, however, you simply take iNaturalist as it comes into GBIF, and just to reiterate again, this is the iNaturalist research grade record, you're starting to see a much more even spread across the taxonomic groups, although, of course, still a very uneven representation of the full tree of life. But I think there is, through many initiatives, there's increasingly opportunities to engage citizens into sharing data for some of the less well-represented taxonomic groups and indeed geographic areas. And I think I would also just emphasize that I pointed to some of the really big ones, but within what's coming through to GBIF from many different citizen science initiatives, there is a diversity of different approaches and different national, country-specific, region-specific types of platforms, which all have their own role, but again, really add value when those networks take the initiative and the trouble to share data using common standards, so it all comes through into that global knowledge base. I would just point to a couple of other specific initiatives focused on citizen science, again coming into GBIF, that address particular taxonomic groups and particular societal issues. So in this case, really looking at the One Health agenda. This is a citizen science initiative that many of you may be familiar with, Mosquito Alert, which brings together expertise and citizen observations to track the spread of mosquitoes, particularly focused on Southern Europe. And in fact, on the left there, you can see a data publication, which has just come out as part of a series in the Gigabyte Journal, which is jointly sponsored by GBIF and the World Health Organization's Tropical Disease Research Initiative, to help to emphasize those links between biodiversity and data and shared biodiversity data, and both research and policies relating to human health. So this is a great example of how citizen science is contributing really very strongly into an important societal benefit area. And just my final example is the way that citizen science data that is initially collected and shared for a great variety of purposes, again, when aggregated, can have unexpected scientific uses. So this is a paper which in fact has just come out looking at the global biogeography of the coloration of a particular species of butterfly and how that's distributed in different parts of the world. And all of the data that went into there were citizen science records shared through GBIF that had photographs attached. So the analysis of the biogeographic distribution of this particular traits within a species of butterfly was entirely derived from photographs, first of all, being shared into individual networks by citizens, but then being aggregated by those networks into the global knowledge base so that new scientific conclusions could be reached. And that's just one small example of the great variety of research benefits that are already accruing from that willingness to share citizen science data, and clearly the potential for scaling that up, particularly with the needs of the post-2020 framework, are ever growing. So that's where I'll stop, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tim. Great testimony to the huge contribution of data set derived from citizen science, and the cumulative impact of that globally, as you said, to enrich our knowledge base. Very, very interesting to see. So I think we have 5 minutes before we turn to the wrap-up session. So following on from what we just heard and picking up on comments earlier in the chat, I invite sort of the panel to potentially discuss how do we better recognize citizen science. You know, what will be your recommendations to policymakers? Because some of you have discussed in the chat the sort of false dichotomy between people-driven monitoring of biodiversity and technology-driven, and you know, it takes design, as you said, resources to support citizen science initiatives. They're not self-organized. They require support. So what would be your take on how do we scale that up and support that better and recognize that better as a key element of transdisciplinary approach to research? Anyone want to comment on that?
I can jump in. I think that one important aspect of it is that we need to have institutional support at all levels. Because if we rely on individual projects, they start, they finish, and after that, what's going to happen with data, with engagement, and so on. And so us as individual researchers, we have a lifespan as researchers, not to mention lifespan as a life itself. And we want the project, the initiatives to continue. So from my experience, one important thing is to have those projects as part of an institutional mission, either in terms of platform infrastructure, but also, as we mentioned, we as researchers have to be evaluated also, and our career evaluated also in terms of that kind of science that we do, which is maybe different. It's a science, it's also its outreach, it's education. In many cases, those other things besides papers are not as well considered for our career. So I think these are critical aspects, not to mention funding and so on, but that has to do with us as a community of citizen science, taking all this experience and for instance, looking at the data and the examples that Tim just showed us, show to the government the importance of citizen science for many areas, from health to education to invasive species, and you know, so we have the conditions to make the case for citizen science at all levels: government, funding agencies, our institutions, careers, and so on. That's my point, I think.
Thank you very much. We have one question that's come through the chat regarding the corporate participation in citizen science. Have you experience around the table on having the business sector involved in projects you worked on? Anyone want to comment on that? Finn, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Finn. Go ahead.
Okay, I could say that, I mean, in a lot of the community-based monitoring programs that we are working with in different parts of the world, it's resource users like fishermen and hunters and forest users and their associations, which are private company partners, you can say. So if you by the private sector or the corporate sector include small-scale resource users and their organizations, which I think we should include, then there's lots of experiences with that, and often they are people that really depend on the biodiversity and ecosystems for their day-to-day living. Looking after the environment will often be part of their survival strategy. Basically, they're already doing monitoring. We just don't tend to not call it monitoring as scientists, but they are already doing monitoring because that's part of the way of being able to sustain a life from the environment, from the nature. Thanks.
Thank you very much for stepping in, and very interesting discussion there. Any other views on that question? Juan?
Yeah, this is Michael here. We just arranged a BioBlitz and training in using a naturalist in Luxembourg, and the base camp was at the brewery. and that made it impossible for us to get it announced for free in the press because there was a private brewery involved. So we did not think of that, but at least sometimes it's not really good to involve some private company because normally the newspapers and even the local television would cover things like this, but they would not without payment because of the involvement of a private company.
Interesting. Thank you. Tim, you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, just a slightly different perspective on this is that although we've been sort of struggling to find the examples, but there is a clear connection, but sometimes it's not very visible, that of course there's an enormous amount of data that's involved in putting together environmental impact assessments. For example, species assessments, red listing assessments to evaluate potential impacts. Many of those will be depending, let's say, on GBIF data, which is itself using a lot of citizen science data. And one of the things that we've been working with private companies and indeed started to work with development banks is to encourage much more open sharing of species monitoring data that's being brought together through for environmental impact assessments, which very often is not transparent. So I think we could certainly think of ways in which that connection, which to some extent is already there, could be much more transparent and productive, where citizens can be directly involved in the evidence that goes into environmental impact assessments.
Very interesting. Also questions of transparency and accountability there. And Antonio? And then
yeah, again, addressing the issue of having private companies as partners. I think there's an issue in any kind of science that we do. We must be careful with whatever partnership we're looking for. But in terms of citizen science, I think, for instance, considering pollinators, which is something that I have been very much involved, it certainly is of interest for agriculture-related companies. I wouldn't mention Monsanto and all, but maybe cooperatives, individual producers, they surely are interested in having working together with us in terms of monitoring either pests or pollinators or any other things that may be of interest for citizen science and for them for their production, for instance.
Thanks a lot. So with that, we need to close this session and we'll move to the concluding segments. Thank you very much to all the panelists. You have a reaction button at the end, at the bottom of your screen that you can use to show your appreciation to the panel. It's been very good to hear the many initiatives on how we use citizen data to enrich our understanding and also speaks to hearts and minds, which we heard about in the previous session as well. Make meaning matter when we talk about the big transformation change that we need in terms of how we relate to nature. So very interesting. And now we're going to move to the closing segment with Ji-Woon Lee, who is Director of Science, Society and Sustainable Futures at the CBD Secretariat. Ji-Woon, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Thank you. Let me first congratulate the organizers, moderators, speakers, and all the participants for successfully organizing and participating in this very important event, which showed us very fruitful inspirations and also interactions. My special thanks go to Alexander von Humboldt Institute and Smithsonian Institution for their leadership roles in designing and organizing this event to provide very concrete and meaningful contributions to the ongoing development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework within the context of Convention on Biological Diversity. It has been a great pleasure and honor for the CBD Secretariat to have collaborated with the Consortium of Scientific Partners for Biodiversity in the past decades. In particular, we greatly appreciate this initiative for citizen science, as it would provide a very meaningful network among citizens, scientific institutions, indigenous peoples and local communities, and many other civil society groups, which demonstrate a great potential to facilitate and support the implementation of post-2020 global biodiversity framework once it is adopted by CBD parties later this year. Let me take this opportunity to remind all of us our shared 2050 vision for biodiversity. World of living in harmony with nature, where by 2050, biodiversity is valued, conserved, restored, and wisely used, maintaining ecosystem services, sustaining a healthy planet, and delivering benefits essential for all people. Today, we have heard a range of inspiring examples, experience, and good practices and successful stories that clearly demonstrate how citizen science can support CBD parties, partners, and stakeholders in achieving this grand vision. In particular, it was very impressive to note various concrete examples showing how the citizen science can contribute to the Convention's core mandates on strengthening knowledge base for biodiversity by complementing the traditional way of monitoring the status and trends of biodiversity, increasing the awareness of society as a whole on the critical value of the biodiversity, creating not only the knowledge base for biodiversity, but also emotional connection with the living creatures on this planet, strengthening the feeling of ownership and leadership, as well as capacities through networking a broad range of citizens for biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, and thereby influencing policymaking processes at global, regional, and national levels toward the path of sustainability. We also noted, I really enjoyed listening to the panel discussion. We also noted institutional and systemic challenges in further facilitating citizen science and the potential for engaging private sector and diverse economic sectors, which are also very important aspects for our future discussion and consideration. As one of the speakers said, we protect only what we appreciate. The appreciation comes from when we are informed, involved, and engaged. In this respect, CBD Secretariat is committed to support this great initiative for citizen science and further enhance our collaboration with the Consortium of Scientific Partners for Biodiversity, as we truly believe that it will provide a very meaningful global platform for strengthening our knowledge base, appreciation, and aspiration for achieving our 2050 vision for living in harmony with the nature. I thank you again, and it was really great pleasure to listen to all your very inspiring stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee, for your kind closing remarks. Thank you, everybody, the speakers, moderators, the support of the CBD Secretariat for this event, our co-organizers. This was great. We have people already in contact with each other in the different networks for further sharing of information, and that's fantastic. And before closing, we would like to take a final group photo. So we appreciate if you can open your cameras and we can take a nice picture of this event. Thank you so much. Cindy, if you can help us with that.
Yes, of course. Please, big smile. That's right. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
Thank you very much.
Bye
See you
bye.
later.
Chao. Hasta luego. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Tchau, colegas. Muito obrigada. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
¿Nosotros nos vamos a quedar en este Zoom?
Sí.
Bueno, denme en 2 minutos, voy por algo que estoy ya desmayada del hambre. Un segundo.
Tranquila.
Congratulaciones para ustedes y muchas gracias por todo.
A usted, Antonio, mil
Obrigado.
gracias. Excelente
Obrigadas,
presentación y
obrigadas.
que sea este el primero de muchos eventos. Creo que el tema es muy motivador.
Claro, sí.
Antonio,
Se abre la
eres-
puerta para muchas cositas, entonces tenemos que aprovechar ahí el apoyo de la Secretaría, el compromiso del CSP. Creo que
Sí,
ahorita van a salir más ideas y luego les convocamos luego para seguir con este partnerazgo
claro.
tan bonito.
Estamos juntos y más cerca.
Precisamos de falar com você, Antônio.